All right, we're doing something a little different on the Rubin Report today. For the past 2 years, we've sat down one-on-one to interview interesting, relevant people, finding out what they think and why they think it. Every week, I also try to share with you what's on my mind with an explanation as to why discussing the ideas of the week is so important. One of the things that we promised you when we launched on Patreon last year was that when we hit the 30K a month mark, we'd start expanding the show in new ways, such as hosting debates and doing more live streams. Well, just last week, we did 3 live streams with Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, Tim Pool, and Maajid Nawaz. This week, we're going to host our first debate. We aren't quite at that 30K mark yet, but we wanted to offer this up as a tease of what's to come and show you that our commitment to bringing you new, engaging content is as strong as ever. So, joining me today are 2 former guests of the Rubin Report, and more importantly, 2 people that I'm proud to call my friends. Dennis Prager is a conservative radio host and author of several best-selling books. Michael Shermer is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine and also the author of several best-selling books. I find both of them to be engaging, interesting, and unafraid to share their personal and political views. About 3 months ago, Dennis did a video for his YouTube channel, PragerU, in which he made the case that without God, there is no objective truth to tell us murder isn't wrong. A few days later, Michael made a follow-up video on why he believes that you can indeed have morality without God. Michael's response to Dennis was respectful and thoughtful, and I thought that it opened a door for us to have a conversation about one of the most fundamental issues about what it means to be human and to live a good life. So without further ado, I present you our first Rubin Report conversation, not debate, but conversation, with 2 guests who hold deeply held opposing beliefs, but who I know will be honest, decent, and respectful at the same time. Here we go. All right, guys, I'm thrilled to be doing this today because I am sitting here between 2 men that I totally respect, but more importantly, I consider friends, that I have broken bread with, that I have just spent time in the green room chatting with. So first, let's do some intros. Here is Dennis Prager to my right, Michael Shermer to my left, and we're going to do something a little different today, a little different than I normally do. I've had both of you on the show before. We've talked about your ideas and let you say what you think about things. And today we're going to have a discussion on something that you guys feel very differently about, but I think can do it in a respectful, honest, and decent way. We're going to be talking about morality and God, something that both of you have written a lot about. You did a PragerU video about 3 months ago, and that's what sort of kicked off the idea for this conversation. And before we do anything, even about the video and even putting morality and God aside for a second, I thought we should start first by just 3 people sitting in a room that are okay disagreeing on some stuff. It has become incredibly rare. The idea that you guys have a totally different view on something that's really one of the most existential questions that there is. But we were all just hanging out there, and your wife's here, and my parents are out there, and everyone was chatting and laughing and having a good time. And this has become almost an endangered species of an idea. So let's just start there. Why do you think this has happened?
I know the reason, but I'm afraid to say it because it will sound like I'm just a political advocate. But I have no choice. I believe that it is virtually entirely a product of the left. And I could prove it. I truly believe it's provable. I have an acronym, SIXHERB. Sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, bigoted. If you differ with anyone from the New York Times, I'm not talking about crackpot left, normal left. If you differ with them, you are bad. You're not wrong. You are bad. And that's the origin. We don't have that. We do not have a SIXHERB. Conservatives don't have a list of adjectives that are comparable. And that's why I attribute it to the left.
See how he buttered me up to start by going right to my wheelhouse. Now Dennis considers himself a conservative. You're sort of a libertarian.
Yeah,
If we had to give you a label, would
the
that?
labels are always problematic because people
Yeah.
have in their mind what they think that is. Like, oh, Ron Paul. No, wait a minute. I don't agree with everything. Classical liberal, I like. You know, and I was glad to see you, kind of throw that back into the ring. That's a label we should all be using. I like that.
Yeah, but what do you think has happened to conversation? I know both of you guys, by the way, you do actually do this. You debate people in a respectful way. I'm considering this more of a conversation than a debate. I'm not scoring this thing at the end.
Right,
I'm
right.
I'm not announcing a winner. But what do you think has happened to that? Because even debates these days with people that are pretty well known and big authors and things have sort of devolved into, I think, what Dennis is talking about, where it's more personal attacks. What do you think happened?
Yeah. Well, I think in part, I think Dennis is largely correct. It's more from the left than the right, certainly. And in the academy, I think it evolved from the 60s emphasis on the use of language and how certain words are toxic and cause people to think differently. And so you start for something like the N-word, let's stop using that, okay. And things like use his and her rather than always his. All right, these are small things, but maybe that, okay. So they kind of get you to kind of go along with some of that. Like I wrote about Sambos, had the little black Sambos, and they had the images of the little black kid, and it's like, okay, that's no longer cool. Mm-hmm. And we've all kind of made that transition, and most of it's reasonable. But then you start, cascading along the spectrum to like, every word you say, every phrase, the way you turn it, microaggressions. There's no evidence at all that microaggressions cause harm. There's not been a single study by a psychological scientist.
I think there's been studies saying that it doesn't, actually. I think one even came out this week.
That's right, yeah. So it just kind of caught on as an idea that's kind of a political movement idea that then got absorbed by the left. So the left's argument is that, okay, so if words matter, words can hurt, then all of a sudden words are violence, and therefore it's okay to commit violence against somebody who uses words. Wait a minute, when did that happen?
Right, and this is this concept of punching Nazis, which I've been saying you cannot punch someone over an idea. Okay, so one other thing before we get into the meat of this. The crux of this is basically that you are a believer and that you are not a believer. So,
well, that's not the crux, forgive me.
But take it away.
No, I don't think it is. Because I have debated atheists like at Oxford many years ago, and it's in print and it's on the internet, so one could see it. The professor, Jonathan Glover, who's an atheist, and a professor of moral philosophy, then at Oxford, now at another British university, the first thing he said when we debated was, I agree with Mr. Prager, if there is no God, ethics are subjective. So, and there are people who believe in God who agree with Michael, that it's whether or not there's a God is important, obviously, but still ethics are subjective no matter what. Or you can have objective ethics without God. So the fact that he's not a believer and I am a believer is not fully dispositive here.
Okay, that's a fair critique, and you actually mentioned that in your video that you put up on PragerU.
That's right.
You say that exact thing. So okay, I'll rephrase it a little bit and just say you are a believer. And you are not a believer. Fair?
Right.
We're fair? Okay.
Correct.
So then I just want to ask one other thing, and then we're going to jump in. Were you always a believer, and where does that come from within you?
Well, I was raised in a religious Jewish home, an Orthodox Jewish home. I didn't stay Orthodox, but I stayed religious. But ironically, and I do write about this elsewhere, you could, again, on the internet, how I found God at Columbia. The truth is, will sound odd, but the biggest single factor in moving me to believe in God has been the secular foolishness that has permeated our society. I was taught at Columbia, it's a prestigious place, by very bright, secular, often non-believers, and I was taught mostly nonsense. And I remember I went crazy thinking, why is there so much nonsense being taught at an Ivy League university by bright people? Then a phrase from the Bible came into my brain in Hebrew, and it's very well known to people who've studied the Bible. You will know the phrase certainly, and that is, wisdom begins with fear of God. And then I realized, wow, no God, no wisdom. And that has permeated my life. In other words, it is the anti-God crowd that has made me realize how important God is. It's not, God didn't appear to me, the religious have not convinced me. The irreligious have convinced me of the centrality of God to the world.
So that's interesting. You didn't have the burning bush moment.
I had the opposite. I had a frozen bush. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I actually mentioned a few weeks ago on the show, I did hike Mount Sinai myself, and I was ready. I mean, I was about 21, and I was ready to see a burning bush, and I hiked at the wrong time of day, so I was, dripping with sweat, and I had eaten some bad pigeon in Egypt, so I was having some stomach problems on the holiest mountain on earth.
That might be.
And nothing happened when I got up there, and I really was ready. So for you, I mean, I know this, so I'm leading a little bit, but were you always a non-believer? Where did this come from?
Yeah, so I was raised in a largely secular home. My parents were not religious. Neither were they anti-religious or atheists. It just never came up. And, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't a thing. Like, what's your religious position? Are you an atheist? Atheism wasn't even a thing. Really to be. So, but when I went to high school and then in college, the born-again movement was kind of taking off. So I became a born-again in high school in 1971. I went to Pepperdine University, which is a Church of Christ school, very conservative at the time, and I was pretty serious about it. I mean, I took all the Bible classes, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the life of Christ, the writings of C.S. Lewis. I've read everything he's written and so forth. And then, and I even went door to door, because if you're an evangelical, by definition, you're supposed to evangelize. That's what you do. So, Amway with Bibles. I did it, and I liked doing it. And then when I became, when I kind of gave that up, I wasn't really a militant atheist, because again, that wasn't really a thing in the late 70s and early 80s when I sort of dropped my religious beliefs. And and so that brings us to this point that atheism isn't really a thing to be. It's just a lack of belief, full stop. So what do you believe? Science and reason and civil liberties and civil rights and equal treatment under the law, all these kind of Enlightenment values that we might call Enlightenment humanism or whatever, classical liberalism. Those are the things I believe in. I don't believe in atheism because it isn't a worldview. It's just, I don't believe in God, full stop. Now what? So then it becomes, okay, so are those values that you believe in, equal treatment under the law, women's rights, gay rights, civil liberties, right and wrong, is murder wrong? And so, yes, I believe they're real, and you believe they're real. So the question then is, well, what's the source? Right, and that basically brings us to you. Before that, you doing this video. Yeah. Yes, I have a question for you, and it's not a trick, nothing. I'm very curious. And I say I think you've heard my show on a few occasions. Yeah, and I think he's been a guest on your show. Yes, absolutely. I listen to your show. No. Why not? I mean, why not listen to me, and why not have you on my show? Okay. So I now say, and I've written on this, the question I most want an answer to, or most curious to get an answer to from an atheist: do you hope you're right, or do you hope you're wrong? I don't really hope. I just sort of go along and just try to lead a good life. And I'm not hoping for anything, really. I mean, if it turned out there's a God. Yes. Would you be happy? I mean, there are undoubtedly people you love in your life. So if there is a God and the traditional belief there's an afterlife, you would reconnect. Sure, I would be glad about that. Right. Of course. Okay, that's all. Okay, let me tell you why I asked. If that was the reason, if that was the version that was real, you know what I mean? People. Well, if God is good, there's an afterlife. If God is an idiot, or God is cruel, or God doesn't give a damn about His creation, then there's no afterlife. But I make only two leaps of faith. It's all I make. That God exists, that God is the creator, and God is good. And if that's the case, then there's an afterlife. That's all. You can't have a good God and this totally unjust world be the only existence. That would be a cruel God. That's all. Or an indifferent God. And the only reason, by the way, I ask it is because, and I'm happy you did that, because I respect you, as you know. And I'm always puzzled if an atheist doesn't answer, well, of course it would be nice, or of course I'd like it. It doesn't undermine your position in the least. I think it gives you credibility
that, in other words, against your desire, nevertheless, your mind has reasoned out there is no God, which is fine.
Which isn't that completely consistent, though, with the things you believe? Because it's sort of that you have a curious mind. So if you found out at the end that it was a little different than perhaps you thought.
I would be curious to know, how was it done? And what is it that actually happens? This is the subject of my next book, Heavens on Earth. So I talk about the idea of uploading the mind into a computer, copying all your memories, and you get to live forever. Or how is that different really from God pulling you up out of the grave? What's he pulling up? Because most religions believe, the body stays in the grave and the soul or the copy of you goes to heaven. Well, if it's a copy of me, then it's not really me. And so what's actually going on there? I'd be curious to know how that works, if that's the case. And also, I do have some issues about heaven, though. I mean, is it boring? I mean, eternity is a long time, especially near the end, as somebody said. As Hitch famously said, heaven would be like celestial North Korea. I don't want a dictator that knows every one of my thoughts. So this can't be, I'm thinking of it as a human, that can't be what heaven would be like. So I don't actually even know, Dennis, what we're talking about.
Right, I don't either. Yeah. I only know that a good God figures out how to undo the terrible injustice of this life. That's it.
I'm curious, I wasn't planning on even asking this, but would you both concede that the other one could be right?
Of course he could be right. Obviously. I would only say intellectually, this has obviously nothing to do with Michael, who I have great respect for. Intellectually, I respect agnosticism more than atheism. The certitude that implies, I don't intellectually quite understand. It's like, I don't understand a believer who never has doubts. Mm-hmm. I don't get it. So I don't understand an atheist who never has doubts.
Do you think that's a fair critique? Because we hear that a lot about atheists. Right, These days, I think we hear it more than usual.
So clarification on the term. So agnostic, technically, when Huxley coined the term, he meant unknowable. Not like you're waiting there for one more experiment or one more piece of data and then I'll make up my mind. He says it's just not knowable in any rational scientific sense. And so ontologically speaking, I'm an agnostic. We can't know. There's no experiment we're going to run. And there it is, 0.05 level significance, God exists.
Right.
Atheist, so there's strong and weak atheism. So strong atheism, I know there's no God. That to me is an indefensible position. So weak atheism, I just don't believe in a God. I could be wrong. That's the more defensible position. So that would be my position.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of consistent with what you're saying.
Well, more so, obviously. I mean, this is not obviously the subject, but it doesn't matter. There's a great dialogue anyway. I intellectually, not emotionally, not religiously, I don't get how someone can look at the universe and think it came about on its own. I debated Lawrence Krauss on the show, who said something from nothing.
Yeah.
So at a given point in the debate, I said, so what is nothing? He said, well, nothing is something. And you know how respectfully I treat people I differ with, because you've been on the show a number of times.
Yeah.
And I was respectful, but I did say something to the effect, I'm now entering a sort of voodoo land. If nothing is something, then nothing isn't nothing. You can't have it both ways.
Couldn't you have pulled some sort of rabbinical something out there?
I probably could have, but yes, right.
Much of it turns on what we mean by these words. So when a physicist like Lawrence Krauss talks about nothing, he doesn't mean it in the same way, say, a theologian might say nothing. Mm-hmm. Because there is no nothing in physics. There's always some energy field, a quantum foam field, something like this, that things pop out of. Like photons of light don't exist, and they pop out of nothing in atoms. So this already happens. Something comes from nothing. That all physicists agree, that's how light is formed. Okay, so why can't a universe do it? This is Lawrence's argument. So when he says nothing, he means something different. And I think at some point we kind of hit an epistemological wall when we talk about things like nothing, eternity, infinity. We as finite beings that are in a three-dimensional world or four-dimensional world, we can't really know what those words mean on some, say, cosmic sense. Yeah. Something outside of us.
Do you think that could be just the great existential question of being a human, that we simply, we'll do this, we can go for hours if you want, We can have you guys clear out your evenings and do dinner here too. But you know what I mean? Like there's a certain amount of people in between, right? That may go, Prager's making a little sense and it'll move me that way, or Shermer's making a little sense and it'll move me that way. But that most people, at a certain point in life, you can't get them to move too far.
Right. That's why I fully admit I don't quite understand seeing the universe and concluding that on rational grounds, just rational, logical grounds, this all came from nothing, and that all the design I see implies no designer. I debated the head of American Atheists. They were a wonderful group, by the way. And I always say they gave me the check that day, which a lot of religious groups do not do. So I just want to be clear.
Yeah. Was this David Silverman?
I don't recall the name.
Okay.
I feel bad.
Okay.
But they had their annual convention in Minneapolis, and I debated their head. And I looked at the audience at one point, and it just struck me to ask them. It was very spontaneous. I said, how many of you, please raise your hand, if you have ever doubted your atheism? And not one hand went up.
Although they maybe were afraid to raise their hand in that community like, hey.
Well, all right, that's possible.
Which is an interesting point, actually.
But I made the point, though. I said, look, when a child is born with terrible deformity, every believer I know goes, where's God? So when a child is born perfectly formed, why doesn't the atheist go, wow, that it doesn't seem that it's completely random.
Well, not random. It's still a wow moment for all of us.
Well, no, wow, but it's a random wow.
Not random. So.
Well, it's either design or random.
No. So the forces of nature are not random. The emergent property of complexity comes from simplicity by the laws of nature themselves. It's built into the system. Now you can ask, well, where are the laws of nature come from?
Yes, well, I would ask. Yes, I do ask that.
But you still have the same problem with the infinite regress argument. So if you say, well, God did it, well, where did God come from? Well, God is that which does not need to be created. Well, why can't the universe be that which does not need to be created?
Because the universe is physical and God is metaphysical.
Well, but there could be a pre-existing state. Again, we can only push back so far to the
well, you
first
can only
three.
push back so far within the physical universe.
That's right.
But the idea that something outside of the physical realm made the physical realm is more coherent to me than the physical realm made itself.
Well, but there could be multiple universes.
Okay, that's the latest. Okay,
yeah.
That's where you lose me.
Well,
where the Dave Rubin show is happening just like this, because there's an infinite number of universes.
Well, no, not that kind of multiple universe.
Not a better show than this. Am I
No,
better in
right.
another universe? That would be nice.
That's a toughie. That's a toughie.
But so that argument to you, that's the same thing as the Krauss argument, right? Like,
you mean the multiple universe?
Yeah.
The multiple universe is a cop-out.
No.
Because he knows better than I, because he knows more science than I. You cannot possibly ever. It's not possible for us to have contact or prove another universe. So it's a statement made that has less argument for it than the belief in God.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you said it was provable, but
no, he didn't say it. But even offering it as an argument, if that's your argument, then I have a good sound argument.
Okay, so that's not quite the argument. So first of all, dispense with the multiple universes where we're sitting here in another studio somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't go for that. Okay, but the idea that there could be an eternal sequence or cycles of universes, kind of a Buddhist sort of thing or Hindu sort of thing, or all the way up to there's a half a dozen of these physical theories that are put forth by physicists. They're not like, oh, I'm an atheist, so I got to come up with something. That's not what they're doing. They're making predictions based on the mathematical principles of the universe and how these laws of nature could come about and so on. They may all be wrong. They may never even be tested. We don't know. And that's perfectly okay in science to throw those kinds of things out there and see what happens. Maybe the gravitational wave research now, that's all the thing, that may be able to detect colliding universes from that cause these gravity waves to trigger. Something like that is possible, not now, but that could make it testable. At the moment, it's not testable. So both of us end up at an epistemological wall where we can't go any further, and then now we're just using words. Well, God is that which does not need to be created and is outside of space and time. Okay, these are just words we're using. You don't know that.
No, I don't know that, but it makes
sure.
more sense than the physical world and everything in it. You and I both love music, So there is no point. Bach, who I'm sure you adore, Bach, essentially the father of Western classical
This may
music.
be the best argument for God's existence, by the way, is Bach.
Yes, yeah, that's why I'm using him.
And a Sophie Mutter playing the violin. Okay, so
right, and he wrote on every one of his manuscripts for the greater glory of God. So you hear this stuff, so we've gone from photons to Bach, and that's designed, but there's no designer. Why that strikes you as more logical is my puzzle.
Well, okay, so the derivative of complex ideas from simpler ideas and from big brains from smaller brains, we can see the gradation in evolution. So the chimp can't do Bach. The dog can't do Bach, or morality for that matter. So the reason we're different than, say, lions killing something, and why we would call it murder and the lion wouldn't, is because we have brains big enough capable of conceiving of morality, music, mathematics, logic, poetry, and so on. And that is special. Wherever the source is, we all recognize it as being transcendently special.